For Isabella Rossi, wife of tech millionaire Julian Croft, that sound was the death knell of a decade-long lie. She stood frozen outside the marble door of their Hamptons estate, the steam curling from beneath it like a venomous mist. She had just returned early from a charity gala, a perfect wife with a perfect life. But when she pushed that door open, she didn't find her husband soaking alone. She found him with her best friend, their bodies entwined in a bathtub filled with champagne and shattered promises. And in that moment, Isabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply turned around, walked away, and vanished into the night, unknowingly stepping from one gilded cage straight into the path of a man whose obsession was about to redefine her entire world. The night had begun like a flawless diamond, polished and perfect. Isabella Rossi, draped in a midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta that mirrored the depths of her eyes, was the epitome of grace on the arm of her husband, Julian Croft. The annual Hamptons Preservation Gala was the pinnacle of the summer social season, a glittering affair where old money and new tech collided in a symphony of champagne flutes and whispered deals. Julian was in his element. His company, Innovate, had just launched a new AI integration platform, and the Wall Street Journal had called him the golden boy of Silicon Alley. He was handsome, charismatic, and radiated a success that was almost blinding. To the outside world, he and Isabella were a power couple, their life a curated masterpiece of charity boards, European holidays, and a sprawling beachfront estate that had been featured in Architectural Digest. But Isabella, an architect by training, whose career had been gently but firmly shelved in favor of managing their brand, knew the truth. Their masterpiece had cracks running through its foundation. The easy laughter had become strained. The shared glances were now fleeting, and the warmth in their bed had long since cooled to a polite, sterile distance. He called it the stress of the launch. She called it loneliness. "Darling, you're a vision," Julian had murmured, kissing her cheek for the benefit of a nearby photographer. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and something else she couldn't place. A cloying, sweet perfume. Not hers. "Go mingle with the Vanderbilts. I need to have a quick word with some investors." She had nodded, a perfect practice smile on her face, and watched him disappear into the crowd. She'd made her rounds discussing art with a gallery owner and charity initiatives with a senator's wife. But a headache, sharp and insistent, began to pulse behind her temples. It was an excuse, but a good one. She found Julian's assistant, a young man named Leo, and told him she was heading home early. "Is Mr. Croft aware?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. "He's busy closing deals," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Just let him know I wasn't feeling well." The drive back to their estate was quiet, the rain beginning to mist across the long private road. The house, usually blazing with light, was mostly dark, save for the warm glow emanating from their master suite. She felt a pang of something, hope, perhaps. Maybe Julian had come home early too. Maybe tonight they would finally talk. She slipped out of her heels at the door, the cool marble a shock to her tired feet. The silence of the house was immense, broken only by the storm raging outside and a faint, rhythmic sound from upstairs. Music, a slow, soulful jazz track. As she ascended the grand floating staircase, another sound bled through the music. Laughter. A woman's laughter, high-pitched, unrestrained, and sickeningly familiar. It was the laugh of Sophie Dubois, her best friend, the woman she'd confided in about her marital troubles, the one who had advised her to give Julian his space. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird, trapped in a cage of bone. Her blood ran cold. No, it can't be. She reached the landing of the master suite. The bedroom was empty, the king-sized bed perfectly made, but the double doors to the master bathroom were ajar, steam billowing out like a phantom. The laughter was louder now, punctuated by a deep, masculine chuckle that she knew as well as her own name. Her hand trembled as she pushed the heavy oak door. The scene that greeted her was a tableau from a nightmare rendered in marble and steam. The oversized, sunken tub, big enough for four, was filled with bubbly water. Rose petals floated on the surface alongside empty champagne flutes. And in the water, slick and glistening, were Julian and Sophie. His back was to her, Sophie's arms wrapped around his neck, her head thrown back in ecstasy as he kissed her throat. The world tilted on its axis. Every sound, every breath was sucked into a vacuum. Isabella saw the details with excruciating clarity, her own expensive bath oils shimmering on the water, Julian's wedding band glinting on the hand resting on Sophie's hip, the way Sophie's dress, a garish sequined number, was crumpled in a heap by the vanity. They hadn't heard her. The music, the laughter, the storm, it all conspired to cloak her presence. For a long silent moment, Isabella simply watched. She felt no rage, no fire, just a profound, hollowing coldness. It was the chilling clarity of absolute truth. This wasn't a mistake. This was a long-running performance, and she had been the unknowing audience. She backed away, silent as a ghost. Her movements were fluid, detached, as if she were watching a film of someone else's life. She went into her walk-in closet, a room the size of a small apartment, lined with clothes she barely wore, and shoes that cost more than a mortgage payment. She ignored them all. She pulled down a single worn leather duffel bag from the top shelf, a relic from her college days. Into it, she packed 3 pairs of jeans, a few simple sweaters, her laptop, a sketchbook filled with half-forgotten designs, and her passport. She took off the 10-carat diamond ring Julian had given her and placed it deliberately in the center of his pillow. She took no other jewelry, save for a simple silver locket her mother had given her. Downstairs, she paused in the foyer. On a side table sat a framed photo of her and Julian on their wedding day, smiling impossibly young and hopeful. Without a second thought, she picked it up, turned it around, and laid it face down on the polished mahogany. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a final definitive statement. She walked out into the rain, not even flinching as the cold water soaked through her designer gown. The car she took was not the sleek black Maserati Julian had bought her, but her old reliable Jeep, another piece of her former life she'd refused to part with. As she drove down the long, winding driveway, the headlights cut a swath through the darkness. In her rearview mirror, the magnificent house, her gilded prison, grew smaller and smaller until it was just another light swallowed by the storm. There were no tears, not yet. There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers, washing away the remnants of a life that was no longer hers. She had no destination in mind, only a direction away. The first 48 hours were a blur of cheap motel rooms and gas station coffee. The Oscar de la Renta gown lay like a silken corpse in the back of her Jeep. Isabella drove until the pristine landscape of the Hamptons bled into the gritty, anonymous sprawl of New Jersey, and then further into Pennsylvania. She was running on adrenaline and a deep, gnawing emptiness. Finally, exhaustion won. She found herself pulling into the driveway of a small, dilapidated house in a forgotten corner of upstate New York. It had been her grandmother's, left to her years ago and mostly ignored. The paint was peeling. The garden was a riot of weeds, but it was hers. It was safe. Inside, dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing through the grimy windows. It smelled of old books and lavender. This was where her real life had been, before Julian Croft had rewritten it in gold leaf. Here she had sketched her first building designs, dreaming of creating spaces that were honest and real, not the hollow monuments to wealth she'd ended up living in. The first call came on the 3rd day. Julian. She let it go to voicemail. Bella. Where are you? I came home and you were gone. The staff is worried sick. Call me. This is insane. His voice was laced with a theatrical panic that made her stomach turn. The texts followed a barrage of them. Are you okay? I'm so worried. Please come home. We need to talk. Then, as the hours passed with no reply, the tone shifted. This is childish, Isabella. Whatever you think you saw, you're overreacting. Sophie was just upset about a breakup. She had too much to drink. The lie was so audacious, so insulting, it almost made her laugh. He thought her a fool. He had always thought her a fool. The next call was from Sophie. Isabella stared at her friend's smiling face on the screen before pressing decline. The voicemail that followed was a masterclass in manipulation, a tearful, broken performance. Bella, I don't know what Julian told you, but it's not what it looked like. I made a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. Our friendship means everything to me. Please, let's just talk. Isabella deleted the message without a second thought. Friendship. The word was now ash in her mouth. Her world had shrunk to the 4 dusty walls of her grandmother's house. The bank account she shared with Julian was frozen. He had cut her off. It was a classic Julian move: control, the money, control the person. Thankfully, she had a small personal account he'd never known about, seeded with the inheritance from her grandmother. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Days turned into a week. The solitude was both a comfort and a torment. In the silence, the images from that night would replay in her mind, the steam, the laughter, the casual betrayal. But slowly, something else began to surface. Her own identity. She found her old sketchbooks and drafting tools. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, she began to draw. She designed a small sustainable community centre, a library built into a hillside, a home that worked with nature instead of dominating it. The lines on the paper were a balm to her fractured soul. She was remembering who she was before she became Mrs. Julian Croft. One rainy afternoon, driven by a need for supplies and human contact, she drove to the nearest town. In a small, independent bookstore, while browsing the architecture section, she felt a presence beside her. Miss van der Rohe, a bold choice for a gloomy day. The voice was deep, resonant, and calm. She turned. The man standing next to her was tall, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored, black cashmere coat that seemed out of place in the rustic town. He had sharp, intelligent eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite. There was an unnerving stillness about him, a coiled energy that was both intimidating and magnetic. Isabella offered a small, polite smile. I prefer less is more to, well, everything else. His lips quirked in a ghost of a smile, a wise philosophy. He gestured to the book in her hands. Are you an admirer or a practitioner? A former practitioner hoping to become one again. She found herself saying the honesty of the words, surprising her. There's no such thing as a former practitioner, the man countered gently. Talent doesn't expire, it just goes dormant. His gaze was intense, as if he could see the ruins of her past life and the blueprints of her future all at once. I apologize for intruding. You seem like someone who values their solitude. He gave a slight nod and turned to leave. Wait, Isabella called out an impulse she didn't understand. I'm sorry. Have we met before? You seem familiar. He paused, his back still mostly to her. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I'm Damien. He didn't offer a last name. Isabella. Isabella. He repeated the name, sounding different on his lips. Perhaps we'll meet again. And with that he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and expensive cologne. Isabella stood there for a long moment, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over her. She shook her head, dismissing it. It was just a random encounter. But as she drove back to the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen those piercing grey eyes before. That night, she dug out an old photo album. Tucked away in the back was a picture from a gallery opening in Soho nearly 5 years ago. It was before Julian had become a household name, before she had faded completely into his shadow. In the background of a photo of her, laughing with an artist, almost lost in the crowd, was a man. He was younger, his hair slightly longer, but the profile was unmistakable. The intense gaze, the set of his jaw. It was him, Damien. He had been watching her even then. The realization sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the old house. The letter arrived a week later, delivered by a high-end courier service that seemed absurdly out of place on the peeling porch of her grandmother's house. The envelope was thick, cream-colored cardstock bearing the embossed insignia of a law firm she recognized, Sterling Cromwell and Finch Julian's legal Rottweilers. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't a divorce filing. It was a proposal, a settlement offer. Julian was offering her a one-time payment of $5 million, the deed to their small Manhattan apartment, and a strict non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreement that would muzzle her for life. The final clause was the stinger. She was to publicly forgive him, state their separation was amicable, and endorse a statement attributing the split to the pressures of his work. She would be a footnote in his triumphant biography, the gracious ex-wife who stepped aside. The offer was both an insult and a threat. $5 million was a pittance compared to the 9-figure fortune. He was purported to have a fortune she had helped build through her social networking and unpaid role as his chief entertainer and brand manager. The NDA was a cage, and the public forgiveness clause was a demand for her to participate in her own humiliation. She tore the letter in half. The war had just begun. Her first call was to a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Anya Sharma, whom she'd met at a charity function years ago. Anya's reaction to the letter was a dry, humorless laugh. "Classic Croft," Anya said over the phone. "He's trying to scare you into a quick and quiet exit. Don't worry, Isabella. He's underestimated you. We'll counter, and we'll go for the jugular half of all marital assets." But Julian was prepared. Within days, Anya called back, her voice grim. "We have a problem. Julian's financials are a fortress. His assets are tied up in a web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and blind trusts that would take an army of forensic accountants years to unravel. He's claiming Innovate is leveraged to the hilt, and that his net worth is a fraction of what's been reported." "He's lying," Isabella said flatly. "Of course he is, but proving it is another matter. He's daring us to spend millions on a legal battle he knows you can't afford. He's trying to bleed you dry." Despair began to creep in. Julian knew her weaknesses. He knew her personal funds were limited. He was strangling her slowly and legally. That afternoon, another courier arrived. This time, the envelope was a stark, heavy black linen. There was no insignia, just her name, Isabella Rossi, written in elegant silver calligraphy. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I believe you are a practitioner in need of a commission. I have a project that requires a unique vision. If you are interested, my car will be waiting at the end of your driveway tomorrow at 9 a.m. DB." DB, Damien Blackwood. She knew the name, of course. Everyone did. Blackwood was a titan, a legend whispered about in tones of awe and fear. He was the CEO of Blackwood Holdings, a global conglomerate with interests in everything from sustainable energy to private space exploration. He was notoriously private, a recluse who rarely gave interviews or appeared in public. He was also Julian Croft's biggest and perhaps only true rival in the tech space. Their companies were locked in a bitter war for market dominance, and he had found her, at her grandmother's forgotten house, the man from the bookstore. Her first instinct was fear. This was a man who played in a league far beyond Julian's. What could he possibly want with her? But fear was quickly replaced by a flicker of something else. Opportunity. Julian had walled her in. Damien Blackwood was offering a door. The next morning, she was waiting at 9 a.m. A sleek black Audi A8, silent as a panther, pulled up precisely on time. The driver, a woman in a sharp suit, opened the door for her without a word. The ride was long and silent, taking her out of the countryside and towards the gleaming skyscrapers of a city she no longer recognized as home. They didn't go to an office. They went to a private airfield. A Gulfstream G650 sat waiting on the tarmac. Inside, Damien Blackwood was seated in a plush leather chair, a tablet in his hand. He looked up as she entered, his grey eyes missing nothing. "Isabella," he said, his voice as calm and deep as she remembered. "Thank you for coming." "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "To see the canvas," he replied cryptically. They flew for 2 hours, landing on a private island off the coast of Maine. It was a rugged, beautiful landscape of granite cliffs, wind-swept pines and crashing waves. In the center of the island, nestled in a pristine cove, was a construction site. "This is the site of the new Blackwood Institute for Environmental Studies," Damien explained as they walked the grounds. "A world-class research facility, a hub for the greatest minds in climate science. But it needs to be more than a building. It needs to be a statement. It must be fully integrated with the landscape, sustainable, beautiful and timeless. I've had 3 of the world's top architectural firms submit proposals. None of them have captured the soul of the project." He stopped and turned to face her, the sea spray misting his dark hair. "5 years ago, at a gallery in Soho, I overheard a young woman passionately describing to an artist how a building should be a conversation with its environment, not a monologue. She spoke of light and form and the honesty of materials. Her vision was compelling." Isabella stared at him, stunned. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I followed your career quietly. You had more talent in your little finger than the established names I was hiring. And then you stopped. You vanished into the role of Julian Croft's wife." He said the name with a subtle, dismissive curl of his lip. "I want you to design the Institute, Isabella. I will give you an unlimited budget, complete creative control, and my company's full resources. I want the vision I heard that night." The offer was staggering. It was the commission of a lifetime, a chance to not only restart her career, but to launch it into the stratosphere. But she was no fool. "Why me?" she asked, her voice sharp. "This isn't just about my vision. I'm in the middle of a contentious divorce with your biggest rival. Hiring me is a public statement." Damien didn't flinch. "Julian Croft is an empty suit, a charlatan who builds his success on smoke and mirrors. His company is a house of cards, and I intend to watch it fall. That is business. This," he gestured to the island around them, "is about legacy. Your involvement is, I admit, a serendipitous complication that I find appealing. But do not mistake me. I am offering you this job because I believe you are the only one who can do it." He then delivered the final irresistible blow. "Your fee for the project will be substantial, and as part of your compensation package, Blackwood Holdings will retain a team of the best forensic accountants in the world to manage your personal portfolio. If those accountants were to say, take a deep, thorough look at all your marital assets to ensure a fair separation of your finances, I would consider it a necessary part of bringing you on board." It was a devil's bargain, wrapped in the language of opportunity. He was offering her a sword and a shield. He was offering her the resources to dismantle Julian's empire and reclaim her life. "But what would be this price?" "You would do that," she whispered. "Julian Croft declared war on you when he cut off your funds," Damien said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous timbre. "He just doesn't realize you've found a new ally. The choice is yours, Isabella. Hide away in your grandmother's house and let him erase you, or pick up a pen and design something magnificent, and in the process, take back everything he stole from you." She looked from his intense, unreadable face to the wild, beautiful landscape. It was a canvas, just as he'd said. A canvas for a new building. A canvas for a new life. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Where do I start?" A slow, predatory smile touched Damien Blackwood's lips. "You already have." Returning to New York felt like stepping onto a battlefield. But this time, Isabella wasn't a refugee. She was a general, Damien installed her not in a hotel, but in a private, unlisted residence at the top of one of his own buildings, a stunning penthouse overlooking Central Park. It was minimalist, elegant, and had a state-of-the-art drafting studio that took her breath away. Your sanctuary and your war room. Damien had called it his words, ringing with dual meaning. The news of her new position broke like a thunderclap across the business world. Isabella Rossi, estranged wife of Innovate CEO Julian Croft, to helm Blackwood's flagship project. The headlines were sensational. It was a calculated, brutal power play, and Julian's reaction was immediate. He called her, his voice a venomous hiss. "What the hell are you doing, Isabella? Working for him? This is a betrayal. He's my enemy." "You seem to be an expert on the subject of betrayal, Julian," she replied coolly. The sound of her pencil sketching across vellum, a quiet counterpoint to his rage. "As for my work, I'm an architect. He offered me a job. It's that simple. I'll ruin you. I'll tell the world what you're really like," he sputtered. "Please do," Isabella said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But be prepared for me to do the same. And unlike you, I have the truth on my side. And Damien Blackwood's lawyers." She hung up her hand steady. The fear he had once inspired in her was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Work became her obsession. She threw herself into the design of the Blackwood Institute, working 18-hour days. The project was a complex, beautiful puzzle, and for the first time in a decade, she felt truly alive. Damien was a demanding partner, but in the best way. He challenged her ideas, pushed her to be bolder, and listened with an intensity that made her feel seen and respected. Their late-night work sessions became a ritual. They would pore over blueprints and 3D models, the city lights twinkling below them. Damien was no longer just the enigmatic billionaire. She saw glimpses of the man behind the armor. His dry wit, his passion for astronomy, the flicker of sadness in his eyes when he spoke of his parents, who had died when he was young. He was fiercely protective of her. When a gossip columnist, undoubtedly paid by Julian, printed a salacious story painting her as a scorned wife seeking revenge, the article vanished from the internet within an hour. The columnist issued a public retraction the next day. "You don't have to do that," she told him one evening as they stood on the terrace, the cool night air whipping around them. "Julian's tactics are predictable and crude." Damien said, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "He attacks the person because he can't attack the work. I will not allow his filth to touch you or this project." There was an intimacy in their shared purpose, a current that crackled between them whenever their hands brushed over a blueprint or their eyes met across the conference table. Isabella found herself drawn to his strength, his intellect, and the surprising gentleness he showed only to her. He would have coffee from her favorite small batch roaster delivered every morning and replace the charcoal pencils on her desk before she even realized she was running low. They were small things, but they spoke volumes. One night, exhausted, she fell asleep at the drafting table, her head pillowed on a roll of schematics. She awoke with a start to find a cashmere blanket draped over her shoulders. Damien was standing by the window watching her. There was a look on his face she had never seen before, a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "You should rest," he said softly. "The design for the central atrium is fighting me," she murmured, still half asleep. He walked over and looked at her sketches. He didn't touch the drawing, but pointed to a specific junction of lines. "You're trying to force the light. Let it guide you. The structure should serve the light, not the other way around." His insight was brilliant, and in that moment, the professional admiration she felt for him deepened into something more complex, something dangerous and thrilling. Meanwhile, the other half of Damien's promise was unfolding. The team of forensic accountants, a quiet, ruthless group he called the surgeons, began their work. They operated from a secure office, and Anya Sharma was their liaison. The first reports were grim confirmation of what they already suspected. Julian's wealth was a labyrinth, but the surgeons were relentless. They were digital bloodhounds, and they had caught a scent. "They've found something," Anya told Isabella during a tense phone call, a series of wire transfers to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. Prometheus Holdings. It's a ghost, but the payments are disguised as R&D investments, and they're draining millions from Innovate's capital reserves. "He's embezzling from his own company." Isabella breathed the scale of his deceit dawning on her. "It's worse," Anya said. "Prometheus Holdings. The primary signatory on the account is Sophie Dubois." The betrayal struck Isabella with renewed force. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. Julian and Sophie weren't just sleeping together, they were systematically looting his company. For what a parachute for when the house of cards inevitably collapsed. The pieces began to click into place. Julian's desperation, his attempts to silence her with a paltry settlement, Sophie's sudden rise from a junior assistant to a high-level consultant with a lavish lifestyle. They were partners in crime. That evening, Isabella was uncharacteristically quiet during her work session with Damien. He noticed immediately. Anya called, she said finally, her voice tight. She explained what they had found. Damien listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I had my suspicions," he said finally. "Croft has always spent money he doesn't have. He's been propping up Innovate stock with exaggerated profit reports and phantom contracts for years. He's running a Ponzi scheme on his own investors." He looked at Isabella, his grey eyes softening. "This is more than you bargained for." "It's exactly what I bargained for," she countered. A new fire in her voice. "He didn't just cheat on me. He belittled my intelligence. He assumed I was just a pretty ornament who wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. He and Sophie were laughing at me." She stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city. "They stole my life, my confidence, my name. I'm not just going to divorce him, Damien. I'm going to help you dismantle him." He came to stand behind her so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a solid, reassuring weight. His biggest weakness, Damien said, his voice a low murmur beside her ear, is his vanity. His new project, the Elysium Tower, is his legacy. He's poured everything into it, including, I suspect, most of the money he's siphoned. Isabella's mind, the mind of an architect, whirred to life. She knew the Elysium project. Julian had bragged about it endlessly. A state-of-the-art residential skyscraper, a monument to himself. "The tower's design," she said slowly, turning to face him. "It was based on some of my early concept work. Concepts I developed in college. He always called them impractical dreams." A slow, cold smile spread across Damien's face. "Is that so? Tell me, Isabella, as an architect, what would happen if the foundational concepts of a building were proven to be not only stolen, but fraudulently implemented?" The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a carefully orchestrated demolition. And Isabella Rossi, the woman Julian Croft had tried to erase, was about to hand Damien Blackwood the detonator. The key was in the details. Julian, for all his bluster, was lazy. He understood branding and hype, but he had no grasp of the meticulous, soul-crushing detail that goes into creating something real. He stole ideas, not processes. Isabella spent a week locked in her studio, not designing the institute, but deconstructing a ghost. She pulled up her old university thesis from a forgotten hard drive, Harmonious Integration, a study in biostructural engineering. It was her passion project, a portfolio of theoretical designs for buildings that used advanced, sustainable materials and were built in symbiosis with their environment. At the heart of it was a revolutionary design for a load-bearing core structure modeled on the internal matrix of a diatom, a microscopic algae. It was elegant, efficient, and incredibly complex. And it was the exact concept Julian had pitched for the Elysium Tower, stripped of its soul and marketed as his own biocore innovation. "He stole it," she whispered to the empty room, a cold fury settling deep in her bones. She remembered showing it to him when they were first dating. He'd glanced at it, smiled patronizingly, and said, "It's beautiful, Bella, but the real world runs on concrete and steel." Working with Anya and Damien's surgeons, Isabella began to cross-reference her original designs with the publicly filed architectural plans for the Elysium Tower. The theft was blatant, but proving it was only the first step. The real weapon was in what Julian had changed. "He's cut corners," she explained to Damien in the war room, her finger tracing a line on a massive digital blueprint projected onto the wall. "My design requires a specific titanium graphene composite for the load-bearing joints to handle the torsional stress. It's expensive." According to these public filings and the supplier contracts, the surgeons managed to acquire. He's using a cheaper grade 4 steel alloy. He's billing his investors for the composite, pocketing the difference and using a substandard material. Damien's eyes narrowed. "And what does that mean in practical terms?" "It means," Isabella said, her voice dropping, "that the building is a facade. It looks fine on the outside, but structurally, it's a ticking time bomb. A moderate seismic event, or even sustained high winds at the upper levels, could cause catastrophic material fatigue. The biocore won't hold. He didn't just steal my design, he turned my dream into a potential coffin for thousands of people." The room was silent. The scale of his criminal negligence was breathtaking. It was no longer about embezzlement. It was about a monstrous disregard for human life. "This is the kill shot," Damien said, his voice a low growl. "We don't just expose his fraud. We expose his recklessness. We can't go to the press yet. He'd bury it in litigation and pass spin. We need an undeniable public forum." The opportunity presented itself a week later. Julian, arrogant and untouchable in his own mind, announced a major press conference and investor gala to celebrate the topping out of the Elysium Tower, the moment when the final structural beam is raised into place. It was to be held at the Glass House in Manhattan, a lavish affair where he would unveil the final interior renderings and secure the last round of funding. "That's our stage," Isabella declared. The plan they hatched was audacious, a multi-pronged attack worthy of a corporate spy thriller. Phase 1, the Inside Man. Damien's team identified the chief structural engineer on the Elysium project, a man named Marcus Thorne. A background check revealed Thorne was a good man with a family, but he had a son with a rare medical condition and crippling hospital bills. He was vulnerable. Damien approached him, not with threats, but with an offer, a confidential, anonymous way to blow the whistle, complete with a new identity, a new job at one of Damien's international firms, and his son's medical care covered for life. All he had to do was provide the unredacted internal structural analysis reports, the ones that would surely show the material discrepancy. After a week of agonizing, Thorne agreed. Phase 2. The Trojan Horse. Sophie Dubois was the weakest link. Her greed was her undoing. The surgeons monitoring her communications discovered she was a silent partner in a high-end art gallery in Chelsea. She was using it to launder the money from Prometheus Holdings. Posing as a wealthy European art collector, one of Damien's operatives approached the gallery, feigning interest in a multi-million-dollar sculpture. He wired a significant deposit to the gallery's account, an account directly linked to Sophie, then deliberately flagged the transaction with the bank for suspicious activity. The resulting automatic federal review would freeze her assets and put her under a microscope just days before the gala. Phase 3. The Architect. This was Isabella's role. She spent days preparing a detailed presentation. It was a side-by-side comparison, her original thesis designs next to the Elysium plans. She highlighted every stolen concept, every shortcut, every doctored engineering spec. She compiled material analysis data and expert testimony from a retired MIT professor of structural engineering, whom Damien had on retainer. It was a meticulous, irrefutable case for intellectual property theft and criminal fraud. The night before the gala, Isabella and Damien stood on the penthouse terrace, the city a glittering tapestry below them. The final pieces were in place. "Are you ready?" Damien asked, his voice soft. Isabella nodded, though her heart was pounding. "I'm terrified, not of him, but of standing in that light again, of being seen." Damien turned to her, his imposing frame blocking out the city. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. His touch was warm grounding. "When Julian looks at you," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur, "he sees a possession he lost. When the world looks at you tomorrow, they will see an accessory to a scandal. But when I look at you, Isabella, I see the architect, the one I've been waiting for." He lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. It was a gesture more powerful than any passionate embrace. It was a mark of respect, of fealty. In that moment, Isabella knew that her feelings for Damien Blackwood ran deeper than gratitude or partnership. She was falling for him, but she also knew that she couldn't truly explore that until the ghost of Julian Croft was exorcised for good. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice filled with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. "For the first time in a decade, they're all going to hear my voice, and they are going to listen." The glass house was a cathedral of arrogance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River, while inside hundreds of New York's elite sipped champagne and murmured platitudes. A massive holographic model of the Elysium Tower rotated slowly in the center of the room, a monument to Julian Croft's ego. Julian was at the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights. He was in his element, a charismatic serpent selling a dream. Sophie stood, just to his side, radiant in a crimson dress, playing the part of the brilliant protégé. But Isabella, watching from a monitor in a small security office backstage, could see the hairline cracks in their facade. Sophie's smile was too tight, her eyes darting nervously towards her phone. The Federal Review had frozen her accounts that morning. She was trapped. Isabella was dressed in a simple, powerful suit of her own design, charcoal grey, with clean architectural lines. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was set with a calm, steely determination. Damien stood beside her, a silent, imposing shadow. He wasn't there to fight her battle, but to ensure the battlefield was level. His security team had swept the venue, ensuring their access and control of the audiovisual systems. Anya Sharma was in the audience, armed with a briefcase full of legal documents. "He is a visionary," a fawning journalist was saying on the monitor. "Julian Croft is not just building a skyscraper. He is building the future of New York." Julian preened. "Thank you. The Elysium is more than steel and glass. It is a promise of safety, luxury, and innovation built on a foundation of integrity." That was the cue. "Showtime," Damien murmured, giving her a single confident nod. Isabella walked out from the wings and approached the side of the stage. A few people in the front row noticed her, first their whispers rippling through the crowd like a virus. Julian, mid-sentence, saw her. His face, projected 20 feet high on the screens behind him, went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, confusion, and then pure, undiluted rage. "Isabella," he said, his microphone carrying the quaver in his voice. "What are you doing here, security?" But Damien's men, discreetly positioned, did nothing. Isabella didn't walk to the podium. She walked to the center of the stage, standing beside the shimmering hologram of the tower. She carried no notes, only a small remote in her hand. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm and clear, amplified by a lapel mic she wore. It cut through the confused, murmuring, commanding silence. "My name is Isabella Rossi, and before my husband sells you the future of New York, I believe you have a right to know about its foundation." Julian's face was purple. "She's unwell," he shouted into his mic. "My estranged wife is going through a difficult time. Please escort her out. Unwell. Isabella echoed her voice, ringing with newfound power. No, Julian, I have never been more clear in my life. She pressed a button on her remote. The giant screens behind Julian flickered. The looping promotional video for the Elysium Tower was replaced by a split screen. On one side, a page from her university thesis, clearly watermarked with her name and the date. On the other, a blueprint for the Elysium's biocore. They were identical. Gasps rippled through the audience. For those of you who don't know, my background is in architecture. Isabella continued her voice, steady and measured, as she began to walk the audience through the irrefutable visual evidence. This is a design I created over a decade ago, a design Julian once called an impractical dream. Now he calls it his legacy. She clicked the remote again. The screen changed to show the material specifications, her original plans calling for the titanium graphene. Composite versus the Elysium's internal documents provided by a whistleblower showing the cheaper steel alloy. But theft, it seems, was not his only crime, she said, her voice turning icy. He also committed fraud. He billed you, his investors, for the best materials while constructing this tower with substandard alloys that compromise its structural integrity. The screen changed again now, showing a 3D stress simulation model created by her team. A simulated high-wind event. The audience watched in horror as fractures appeared along the core of the holographic tower, spreading until the entire structure failed in a silent, terrifying digital collapse. My design was a dream, Isabella said, her voice filled with a righteous fury. In his hands, it became a nightmare, a facade that places thousands of lives at risk, all to feed his ego and line his pockets. Panic began to erupt in the room. Investors were on their phones, their faces pale. Journalists were shouting questions. Julian, cornered and exposed, snapped. He lunged for her, his face a mask of primal rage. You lying bitch! He never reached her. Damian Blackwood moved from the wings with a speed that was shocking. He intercepted Julian, grabbing his arm in a grip of iron. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Croft. Damian's voice was lethally quiet. At that moment, the main doors of the venue burst open, but it wasn't building security. It was a team of FBI agents led by a grim-faced detective. Anya Sharma pointed them towards the stage. Julian Croft, one of the agents, said, his voice booming over the chaos. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Sophie Dubois had tried to slip away in the confusion, but another agent intercepted her at the door. Ms. Dubois, we have a warrant to search your properties in connection with an ongoing investigation into money laundering. As they cuffed a stunned, sputtering Julian, his eyes locked with Isabella's. In them, she saw no remorse, only pure, unadulterated hatred. And she felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pity, only the quiet, clean finality of a door closing for good. The cameras flashed, capturing the ignominious fall of the golden boy. Isabella Rossi stood tall amidst the wreckage, no longer a wife, no longer a victim, but the architect of a spectacular and just demolition. She had not only taken back her name, she had ensured his would be remembered only in infamy. The aftermath was a media firestorm. The collapse of Julian Croft's empire was swift and total. The Elysium Tower project was shut down, its assets frozen. Investors sued the board, resigned, and Innovate filed for bankruptcy within a month. Sophie Dubois, facing federal charges and abandoned by Julian, cut a deal and testified against him, detailing their entire scheme in exchange for a lighter sentence. Julian Croft, denied bail, was facing decades in prison. Isabella handled it all with a quiet grace that baffled the ravenous press. She gave one and only one interview. She didn't speak of betrayal or heartbreak. She spoke of architectural integrity, of professional ethics, and the responsibility that comes with power. She framed the narrative not as a domestic dispute, but as a necessary act of public service. In doing so, she shed the label of scorned wife and emerged as Isabella Rossi, a formidable professional in her own right. Her work on the Blackwood Institute became her focus. The design she created was hailed as a masterpiece before the first foundation was even poured. It was bold, innovative, and deeply respectful of the island's natural beauty. It was the culmination of all her deferred dreams, a testament to her rediscovered talent. Her relationship with Damien evolved beyond the crisis that had forged it. The late-night work sessions continued, but now they were interspersed with shared meals, long walks, and quiet conversations about everything and nothing. He showed her his world, not the ruthless CEO, but the man who read classic poetry, who could navigate by the stars, and who looked at her with an aching tenderness that melted the last of her defenses. One evening, months later, they were on the island, walking along the beach at sunset. The foundations of the institute were visible on the cliffs above them, a promise taking shape. "It's going to be beautiful," Damien said, his eyes on the structure. "I had a good patron." Isabella replied with a small smile. He stopped and turned to her, taking her hands in his. The setting sun cast his chiseled features in a warm, golden light. "Isabella, when I first sought you out, I'll admit my motives were not entirely pure. You were a weapon I could use against Croft. A beautiful, brilliant, and righteous weapon. I wanted to see him fall, and I saw a way you could help me." He paused, his thumb tracing a line over her knuckles. "But then I got to know you. I saw your passion, your strength, your integrity. The weapon became a treasure. My desire to ruin him was eclipsed by my desire to see you rise. The obsession. It was never about him. It has always been about you. From the moment I first saw you in that gallery 5 years ago." Isabella's heart swelled. He wasn't a savior who had rescued her, but a partner who had truly seen her, and given her the tools to rescue herself. Theirs was a foundation built not on weakness or need, but on mutual respect, admiration, and a profound connection. "What I went through with Julian, it broke me," she confessed, her voice soft. "I thought I would never trust anyone like that again." "Then, don't," he said, his gaze intense and sincere. "Don't trust me. Instead, build with me. Let's be partners. In work, in life. Let's build something as honest and as timeless as that building on the hill." She looked up at him, at this powerful, complex man who had entered her life like a storm and had become her calm harbor. She saw her future in his eyes, a future not of gilded cages or hollow promises, but of shared blueprints and endless horizons. I think she said, a genuine, radiant smile spreading across her face. "I would like that very much." He leaned in and kissed her a kiss that was not about possession or passion, but about homecoming. It was a promise sealed against the sound of the ocean and the silhouette of the new foundation they would build together. She had walked away from the ruins of one life only to find the architect of the next. And so, Isabella Rossi's story isn't just about the fall of a deceitful millionaire. It's a powerful testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. She walked away from a life that was perfect on paper, but empty in reality, and in doing so, she didn't just find a new love, she rediscovered herself. She proves that our greatest comeback is not in revenge, but in rebuilding our own lives on our own terms, using the very talents others tried to bury. Her story is a reminder that sometimes you have to demolish everything to find a solid foundation upon which to build your true legacy. What did you think of Isabella's journey from a silenced wife to the architect of her own destiny? Could you have walked away with such strength? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.